Hey everyone, it's Horror Free For All, and today I'm bringing you another video wrapping up the Tales from the Darkside series. This will be a ranking / review all in one of the show's final season, which is season 4, which is collected on this disc here. Now, for those of you that don't know, season 4 of Tales from the Darkside aired 20 episodes in its run, and numerically on the timeline, it is episodes 71 through episodes 90, and that's how I refer to them, right? But there's 2 bonus episodes included on here called Akbar's Daughter and Attic Suite from a spin-off show called Night Rose that I don't think ever actually aired on television, but over the years, because they were included on here, these have retroactively kind of become Tales from the Darkside episodes, even though their gimmicks and style of stories don't really match up all that well with the show, but they still fit in more so than the sister series that came after it, Monsters. So I've decided to go ahead and include them as 2 bonus episodes on top. And as well, to make it 93 total, a fan named Jason Quadrado made a episode entirely computer generated, and it's on YouTube to watch. I'll provide the link in the description of this video. And the episode is called The Soot Man. Now, the only reason why I am including this fan-made episode on Season 4's ranking is, one, because there's no other season to put it on, unfortunately. The modern interpretation, the modern spin-off that Joe Hill had planned on the CW years ago never happened. So, that's why it's here. But as well, George Romero's wife has given her thumbs up of approval that episode that Jason Quadrado made was very much a spiritual, episode to the show, and it's exactly something that she thinks would have been on there. So, because it has her blessing, I have included it on here. And if there's other Tales from the Darkside fan things that come up in the future that I think are worthy, I will mention them in their own reviews and retroactively add them in. But that's what I'm considering the basis for of season 4. The core 20 episodes, plus the 2 Night Rose episodes that went unaired, and then the fan-made episode to make 23 total episodes. Now, that being said, season 4 of Tales from the Darkside, I think is the best season of the whole show, bar none. I saw the quality of season 1, right? And trust me, as somebody who primarily started watching this show as an adult, given that I did see maybe some reruns here and there on the Chiller Network when I was in high school, but this was well past my time. This was a 1980s show. This was on syndicated television. And I've noticed since season 1 that the old syndication format has kind of harmed this show. They have episode time slots to fill. They have X amount of episodes to produce a season that's ordered. They have to stretch the budgets that they're given for the seasons over to certain episodes to make them pop, and some other ones definitely get the lack of good treatment there. And that's been the case since season 1, but I think as time has gone on throughout the show, I can definitely see a increase in quality inherently just from lowering the amount of episodes. Even 2 episodes, I think, kind of help season 3 in some episodes' budgets. And in season 4, not having 24 episodes and only having 20 initially really helped the quality of some of the episodes there. So that just makes me think that season 4 is probably the sweet spot for the show, around 20 episodes. And this has been a trend since season 2 where they've been improving their ideas and concepts, making them less messy. Not saying that season 4 doesn't have its own hiccups and its own doozies, but I definitely think that this is the best representation of the whole show. If I was to recommend any season for fans to start with, or interests, people with interests to start the show, I would actually say go in reverse order. Start with 4, then go down to 3, then go down to 2, and then go down to 1. I think starting with the best is better than starting with some of the weakest. You know what I mean? That's just my opinion. Some people might disagree and think that season 1's a great season. That's fine. But I think in order from, I guess, worst season to best season, it's actually season 1, then season 2, then season 3, then season 4. Season 1 being the worst, Season 4 being the best, and 2 and 3 just getting progressively better. Season 4, unlike Season 1, 2, and 3, I'd actually would say is a very good season. Season 1 was a decent at best. Season 2 was good, but on the lower end. Season 3 was a bit better, higher end good. And this one, of course, is like a little bit of a whole grade step up. So yeah, in case you were wondering, that's the season I recommend to start with. But since we have 23 episodes to go over, we got to start somewhere. And the criteria for these, they're broken up in different categories. We have awful, bad, meh, okay, decent, good, very good, great, and perfect. And I'll say this now, the only category that did not get an episode in was bad. There was one awful, but the season was the only season able to produce a perfect episode for me. So that gives it the distinction of being the best all its own. It has a lot of the same consistency as season 3, but this is just a step up for me. Alright? So, since we have one awful, I guess we'll start there. At number 23, the worst episode of season 4, and possibly one of the worst episodes in the whole show, period, was episode 78, Seymour Llama. This was a story by Harvey Jacobs, and I gave this a 1.25 out of 5 stars. This episode is incredibly offensive. It's very reminiscent to Parlor Floor Front from season 2, or the episode from season 3. I'm forgetting the name of it, but the one about, I think it's My Own Place. That's what it's called. This is another one of those just bad taste episodes that I absolutely hate. The premise isn't that bad, but I think it's the portrayal of cultures on screen that's just no. And it goes south from there. The story is essentially about this teenager. He discovers that he may or may not be the reincarnation of this former guru who has like a Middle Eastern connection, right? But what you see, who the guru is just a white guy with a Persian accent. And the acting is atrocious in this episode. It goes down this silly comedic route. The story directions just don't have me here. It's really offensive. I guess stuff like this was commonplace in the 1980s. There was like 3 or 4 examples of similar things like this going on in the show. If this shit got made today, people will be way more pissed off. I will say that. But yeah, Seymour Llama, that was a doozy. Alright, now entering the meh, we have 2 episodes. At number 22, we have episode 72, Mary Mary. This was a story by Jules Selbo, and I gave this story a 2 out of 5 stars, which is a very low meh. This is one of the episodes in the show where just nothing happens. It's a metaphorical story, I think. You have this premise of a woman who has this collection of mannequins in her apartment. She's a kind of a recluse. She talks to herself, talks to these mannequins. And this guy across the street from her who can like see into the window of her apartment has developed a crush on her and wants to like take her out. But she is so insecure, and the story goes this weird, bizarre route that kind of insinuates that maybe she was a mannequin this whole time. There's no real mystery to it. It's just a character inflection that's just really boring and flat, and it's just not interesting. I had really no enjoyment out of this episode, and then the twist just kind of ruins it even further for me. But yeah, woulda, coulda, shoulda with this episode. At number 21, we have the next to last episode of the original run. That's episode 89, Barter. This was a story by Lois McMaster Bujold, and I also gave this a low 2 out of 5 stars. This, by every stretch of the word, is a parody. They take 2 black and white sitcoms from yesteryear, I Love Lucy and My Favorite Martian, and try to blend them together. And while I do appreciate the style of the episode, I do think it's a 1950s and early 60s throwback in a lot of the best ways, but this episode is just beyond cringy, over the top, and a really dumb premise. Essentially, this couple, who is like a parody of the Ricky and Lucy characters from I Love Lucy, had this son who likes playing drums. And the parody of Lucy is so tired of hearing the drums that one day when this My Favorite Martian guy, he's supposed to be like a ripoff of him, he's like a door salesman, comes in with this technology. He wants to barter the technology with, let's just say, a drink that he drinks because he's an alien, right? But this technology goes south and does something with her son, and then they have to continue to barter with the man, and the ending is just really bizarre, and I think it's just, you know, for the style, I put it here. If not for that, this would be in the bad. But there are some jokes in here that are kind of funny. I do think it's kind of smart in some ways. It's just not for me all the way. I can totally understand if this is one of your favorites. It's just not one of mine. Alright, now entering the okay, there's only one episode in this category, and it's number 20, which is episode 90, the last episode of the original run, Basher Malone. This was a story by Peter O'Keefe. I gave this a high okay at a 2.75 out of 5 stars. Basher Malone, right? Basher Malone. If you're a wrestling fan, you might absolutely love this. But other than that, this is one of those times where I would say this is a so bad, it's entertaining kind of situation. Story-wise, this episode is absolutely shit. But entertaining-wise, right? With the performances, with the premise, it's kind of fun, right? It's a really dumb idea, though. This wrestler, who's like a forthright, honest guy, he has a mom who brings milk and cookies to his wrestling matches and throws milk and cookies on people and patrons of the audience and him. He's been beating this, I guess, manager of sorts of these wrestlers and his whole stable of wrestlers. And the guy's getting tired of it, and he decides to call hell itself to recruit a worthy opponent to finally beat Basher Malone. And the climax is essentially just really over-the-top shenanigans, and it's bizarre. Yeah, it's bad, but it's entertainingly bad. You know what I mean? This is like good old C-movie cheese that you can just have fun with. And if you like it more than, you know, the bottom 5 of this season, I can understand that to a degree. It's just not for me. Definitely one of the ones I would cut if I had to cut any episodes out of the season. Alright. Now we're entering the decent territory. We have 4 episodes here. And at the bottom of the decents, we have number 19 overall, episode 82, The Deal. This was a story by Granville Burgess and Alan Coulter. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. This story is just super generic, by the book. You've seen this story done many times. It's essentially about a guy who lives in Hollywood. He's trying to catch a big break. He's befriended this man with a dog. And the man may or may not be the devil himself, you know, offering contracts to him. If he sells a soul, he can have fame. And the guy learns he might want to get out of that contract and has to do something to get out of it. That's essentially the story, right? It's a very flat story. There's no cool, fresh spin on it at all. The acting is decent at best. The twist is mildly entertaining because there's some like comeuppance angle with it that you don't see coming, that's the reason why I put it here. If not, I would just have put it in okay. But yeah, this one is just not my speed as well. I do think it's a step up from Basher Malone, though, at least in terms of story. But that's all it really has going for it. Alright. At number 18, we have the first Night Rose episode I'm going to be bringing up. And that is episode 92, Attic Suite. This was a story by Michael McDowell. I gave this story a 3 out of 5 stars. Now, in terms of production value, this is definitely one of the more dynamic episodes offered, if you're including the bonus episodes in Season 4 like I did. The acting here is actually pretty riveting, and there's some really solid, emotional, like, convection going on from screen to the audience. But the story, I'm just throwing it out there, it's really flat. But the premise is alright. This couple who is struggling financially, the husband gets laid off from jobs all the time because the town they live in unfortunately doesn't have a lot of, you know, job offerings around. And his wife, she's reluctantly a stay-at-home caregiver of their great aunt who lives up in their attic. And the husband likes the woman, but the wife just finds her as a nuisance, and they come to realize that there's some life insurance money they can get from her death, and they can use it to pay off some debts, get a new car, stuff like that. So the episode is essentially about them coming up with ideas on their own of how to get rid of this woman. And the woman may or may not be actually willing to die. And there's some really thought-provoking stuff in that. But for me, as much as those thought-provoking things are interesting, there's just not a lot to it. And the ending of it is kind of bad, in my opinion. The way the episode just wraps up. It is a comeuppance for one of the characters. But, yeah. Maybe in future rewatches, I might be able to put it up higher. But as of now, I'll leave it here at number 18. At number 17, we have episode 73, The Spirit Photographer. This was a story by Mark Patrick Carducci and Brian Thomas Jones. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars as well. This is a story, it's like a more science fiction-y story with a supernatural element. This man, he's a photographer, and he's trying to prove that ghosts exist. And in order to do this, he's invented this machine that when you place it in the center of a room in like a haunted house, it could bring a ghost to the forefront and make it appear visibly, and you could take a photo of it. And he's activated this machine inside of this haunted house, trying to wait out this ghost that's for sure supposed to be there. And that may or may not come to fruition. He may or may not get a photo of her. And there may or may not be a revelation to something that may or may not have happened to him. There's a lot of may or may nots in that sentence there. But you get the gist. That's pretty much the story. Now, it's very flat. There's not a lot going on. There's stretches of the episode that are just kind of suspenseful, but just kind of weak. You know, it's just a lot of dialogue. There's like a side character that comes in. A lot of just bantering going on. The guy's like isolated. You don't really get any entertainment out of his, monologue or anything. It's just there. But the ending twist was kind of fun. There's a lot of shoehorned in ideas, like forced correctiveness going on to kind of just make the twist work, and that just kind of pisses me off. If it had a better ending, I probably would be willing to give it a little bit of a higher decent, but it lands here. And to round off the decents, we have the second Night Rose episode to talk about, and that's episode 91, Akbar's Daughter. This was a story by Stephen Dick and John Harrison, who John Harrison, he wrote a bunch of teleplays based on stories in the show, but he only ever wrote, I think, one straight up himself, and that was I'll Give You a Million from season 1. So this was refreshing to see him come back. I gave this a 3.25 out of 5 stars. Now, I should warn you, Night Rose was going this more crime, mystery, drama, romance element, and this episode is pretty much a softcore porno. Straight up. I mean, I'm not going to lie. But the setting was entertaining, and there's a lot of redeemable factors that maybe put it in decent. And it's some pretty decent body horror near the end, but there's just not a lot to it, again. But the story is essentially about this man who's trying to make a business deal with like this foreign investor guy. And the foreign investor has invited him over to his estate. And he has like a personal servant and a beautiful daughter. And the man, he's kind of like a philanthropist, and he's also kind of like he loves his woman, let's just say that. And he may want to try to romantically pursue this man's daughter. And he thinks he does in the episode. And there's some long, drawn-out sex scenes, I should say. It's not graphic or anything, but yeah, it's very, yeah, it goes there. I should say that. And there's some twists and turns involved with the story. It had a decent mystery aspect to it, and the twist was pretty graphic. There's some mildly good body horror going on, but just not for me. I think the softcore porno bits take me out of it a little bit, but nonetheless, it was a finely put together episode. Some people might like it more. I could totally understand, but not for me. All right. Now we're entering the long stretch of good episodes. There's 10 here, a lot to cover. So let's just dive in. At number 15 overall, we have episode 80, Payment Overdue. This was a story by Richard Benner, and I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Now, Payment Overdue was a finely crafted episode. It has a really good moral, probably one of the best morals done in the show, and it had a fun setup and payoff, dealing with one of the side characters that may or may not play a bigger role near the end. And that's always fun and invited for me. But it's one of those episodes that just missing the X factor, missing that mild schlock, that mild campiness that I'm looking for. But it was still well crafted, like I said. The premise is essentially about this online debt, not online, but over the phone debt collector is calling around patrons, telling them that, hey, you owe this amount of money and we have to receive payment. She's very ruthless, and she gets a call, which she never receives calls, from this woman who is, kind of spooky. If she looks up this woman's name and it comes up that she's deceased and she doesn't know how to resolve the situation. And then there's another character that comes in that introduces this concept that I don't want to spoil because it'll easily give context of what's going to happen near the end. But let's just say the person that comes in tells her about this concept, that the spiritual concept with like dealing with heaven and stuff that may not play a role in the end, and this ends up becoming a consequence for her. Yeah, like I said, I thought it was a good episode. It's entertaining, definitely better than the ones below it. Just not for me all the way. I like it fun though. At number 14, we have episode 87, Going Native. This was a story by Andrew Weiner, and I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars as well. Going Native is easily the most art house episode of the whole Tales from the Darkside show. It's very softcore porn-like, same like Akbar's Daughter, but it's a little bit less. But the story is a little more cut and dry. There's really no mystery aspect to it. It's essentially just about this woman who tells you early on, this is not even a spoiler, that she's from an alien planet and she's here on Earth to learn human emotions, or at least understand them. But there's a twist involved with learning human emotions, in that if you actually start to feel human emotions, you're never allowed to go back to the home planet, right? And throughout the episode, she keeps throwing herself into different situations, like therapy sessions with like group therapy, and she even tries to get in a romantic relationship with a man to see if that can help understand. But what ends up happening is come to be expected, right? And I'll just leave it there. Like I said, I think the atmosphere to the episode, and I guess the editing and the directing style, was the most captivating I've seen in the show. The soundtrack to this episode also, I should really note. I don't really do that, but this one was just well crafted. It feels like the person directing this episode was trying really hard to impress and get future work out of it, and I hope they did, because they did a great job at directing this story here. It's just not for me. It's a little art housey for my taste, not exactly what I'm looking for. At number 13, we have episode 85, Do Not Open This Box. This was a story by Franco Amuri and Bob Balaban. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars as well. For what it is, I think this episode's good. It has flaws bringing it down. I could definitely see myself maybe raising this to a higher good, maybe even a low very good one day. I like the acting to it, but the premise is typical Darkside stuff. There's nothing really groundbreaking here. It's kind of predictable. But on the less egregious side of that, the story's about this couple who get delivered this box that says "Do not open this box," and the wife, she is constantly complaining about stuff that she's never been able to get in her life, and she decides to open it because she feels entitled to. And once she learns what's inside the box, it pisses her off, and the mailman who delivered it has come back to collect the box from them, and they spend the whole episode trying to give them the runaround and trying to dodge what he's asking for. And there's maybe some bribery going on, and there might be a metaphysical, spiritual twist to it all near the end. It's an episode I like fine, right? It's just not my speed, not what I'm looking for, again. But still good. At number 12, we have episode 75, No Strings. This was a story written by David Odell. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. A lot of you are going to be pissed off that I put this episode this low, but if I'm being honest, this is definitely one of those episodes I see that are overrated. I think Halloween Candy, this one, and I forget the other one. It might come to me soon. But there's a couple that I think are just mildly overrated. And this is one. No Strings is a very schlocky episode. It's probably one of the most schlockiest things I've ever seen. It's a story about this man he's like a marionette puppeteer. He gets abducted by this alpha male mobster guy. And he wants him to do a private show in like this warehouse. And the guy has his wife and all of his goons around. But the twist is, instead of using his famous puppet, that's a creepy ass clown, he wants him to use a dead body. And the dead body is of his former lackey that he's considered a rival. And the reason why that he wants to have this done is because he wants to be able to act out and role play him telling him off. Yeah, and the story, not to mention, has a lot of padding, a lot of forced stuff in there, just to create shock value. There's nonsensical context going on, and then the reasons provided, the explanations don't really make fucking sense at all. But the ending is really good. The ending is one of the best endings in the whole show, and I'll give it that. But nonetheless, I don't know. It might be able to go up in the future. I just think this one was just not for me. But still good for what it was. At number 11, we have episode 71, Beatles. This was a story by Robert Bloch, and I gave this a 3.75 out of 5 stars. This one was disappointing because the other 2 Robert Bloch episodes in the series beforehand I really enjoyed. And this one I did enjoy, but not as much as those other ones. This one was a little more basic than I thought it would be. It's essentially about this guy. He may or may not be like an archaeologist or a guy trying to get rich quick. And he gets, let's say, a mummy sarcophagus in his possession. And this sarcophagus may or may not have these gems that are one of the most expensive gems that you can find in the world. But after the man removes them, there's a curse placed upon him. And let's just say there's some bugs coming after him. It's fine. I think the better bug story, what this was going for, at least with the shock value, was done better in Creepshow's original film with their creeping up on you. Other than that, yeah, it's like an Egyptian Flare version of that story. Yeah, been there, done that, but it was still well put together. I liked it fine. At number 10, we have episode 83, The Apprentice. This was a story by Ellen Sandhouse, and I gave this a 3.75 out of 5 stars. This episode was so great because I am a history buff, right? And this was so fun because of the twist involved. It recontextualizes the 1692 Salem witch trials. And it places a really cool time travel aspect into it that may or may not insinuate that a woman from, the 1980s was sent back to 1692 to be a part of the Salem witch trials. And that's pretty much the story, right? This woman, she's looking for a job. This man hires her at this historical site, but something happens to her and she may or may not get time traveled back in time, and you learn the motives of why this man may or may not be doing this, and maybe that he's done this to other women. And yeah, I won't go any further than that. I love this story as a creative twist on historical truth. It's historical fiction essentially, but it is fun. It's a fun episode. I wish it just had more to it. The ending where it ends is it's a mild stinger, and I kind of wish they went further beyond and just showed some graphic shit after that. But other than that, this was a solid one, and I definitely commend the episode for what it did. At number 9 overall, we have episode 79, Sorry, Right Number. This was a story by Stephen King, which I think he wrote for the show, but it later appeared in Nightmares and Dreamscapes, or maybe vice versa. I think the script of this episode is in there, but I gave this a 3.75 out of 5 stars. This story is just an emotional story. It's not really scary. It's just very tense, and it's well acted. It's well told. It's just a perfect package, but it's just not what I'm looking for. Right? It's a good episode, in my opinion. That's not taking anything away from the quality of this story, though. The premise is essentially this woman and her husband are hanging out one night, and she's been on the phone, and she receives a weird phone call from a relative that she can't make out, but the message is kind of blurred. And she gets worrisome because This is very out of character. They try to call around, and there's some weird shenanigans going on. So her and her husband decide to go search around for which relative they think it is. They end up finding who it is, but shortly after, something tragic happens to the husband, right? And there's a time skip 10 years later, and that phone call from 10 years beforehand may or may not have a revelation being given to somebody, right? And yeah, it's a very whole story. It actually almost made me shed a tear, to be honest. It's just a downright depressing story. And the soundtrack to this, I'll bring this up again, the soundtrack to this one I think actually helps the story. Yeah, this was a pretty decent Stephen King adaptation. Well, I'd say more than decent. It was pretty good. All right. At number 8, we have, this might upset a few people out there, but we have episode 77, The Yattering in Jack. This was a story by Clive Barker, who also directed the episode, I think. And I gave this a 3.75 out of 5 stars. I believe this story came out in, what did he write? The Blood Tales? Is that what it's called? Something like that. Back in the 1980s. I think that's where this story originated from. This story was very weird and bizarre. It's like a Christmas feeling story. Essentially, this demon of sorts, who is in charge of trying to convince people who have gone astray from the path of spiritualness to see this supernatural things going on and acknowledge it, and by doing so, it unlocks this ability. And I don't want to spoil it, but let's just say it has something to do with the afterlife and maybe into hell, right? Well, this demon, who's played by a little person that I recognize from a few things. I think he was in Double Toil and Trouble, a Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen movie I saw years ago. But he's trying his best to convince this man that weird stuff were happening. There's some over-the-top shenanigans involving that. And the man's daughter seems to be acknowledging it, but the man is like, there's a reason for everything. Everything can have a rational explanation, right? And it just continues on, and the demon has to interact with, let's just say, an acolyte from hell, and there's a revelation involved, and there might be something that happens to the demon in the end. Yeah, it's an entertaining episode. Just not for me. It's a little too goofy, if I'm being honest. It's not my speed. But I could totally understand if this is one of your favorites of the show. Alright. At number 7, we have episode 76, The Grave Robber. This was a story by Harvey Jacobs. And I gave this a 3.75 out of 5 stars. It's kind of weird to see him do The Grave Robber and then make something like Seymour Lama. Now, the benefit with The Grave Robber is that I'm pretty sure that it wasn't it wasn't a person from Egypt or someone from the Middle East playing a mummy, right? It was like a kind of the New York accent, but it was really fun. The makeup effects in this episode are fantastic, right? And the humor to this just kind of won me over and kind of won my heart. It was a well-written episode. So essentially, this Egyptologist and his assistant woman have uncovered this pharaoh's tomb. And when they break inside to look around at like the artifacts and stuff, they open up the sarcophagus, and this mummy comes to life and locks him inside of this tomb with him. And at first, the mummy's like, well, I'm going to do something horrible to you. But then the woman comes up with this plan to distract them. And then the mummy and them start to get kind of acquainted. And they start trying to make deals with each other. And they start playing these games. And there's a fun twist dealing with the mummy and like in terms of the bandages and how that works. And there's even a fun little schlocky body horror moment near the end where you get to see like a full mummy body. And a comeuppance type of twist going on. It's kind of dark and morbid and also sad. But yeah, this was a funny episode. This is definitely one of the funnier Tales from the Darkside episodes. It's just, there's something about it that just I wish was more. It's just a lot of them just shooting the shit, doing these games and stuff. It's entertaining, don't get me wrong. It's just, I love other stuff way more than it. And to round off the good, at number 6 overall, we have episode 81, Love Hungry. This was a story by Robert Scanaway, and I gave this a 3.75 out of 5 stars as well. I was not expecting to like this episode as much as I did. The story's about this woman who has some weight loss issues, and she's kind of self-conscious about it. She's locked away doing a telemarketing job at her home. She rigorously feeds her plants. She has a huge collection of plants, and she's always trying every single diet ad that she sees in the local ad papers, right? Well, she sees one day, and she gets a call, and the thing randomly delivers it to her house the day of, and she gets this product, and she's iffy about using it. But similarly in the same day, she gets a random call from this guy from high school, and they go out on a date, and they reconnect. But while she's on the date, she decides to try out this weight loss stuff because she's insecure about how she looks in her outfit. And quickly from there, it goes bizarre. But it's entertainingly bizarre. Essentially, this thing may or may not be allowed to have food talk, like plants. And it goes very weird. There's some like cool little clay puppets and stuff like that. And it's very dark, especially with the ending. I was not expecting that shit. My only issue with this episode, and it kind of does hamper the whole thing, is the plot convenience going on story-wise, the convenience of everything, and just how kind of kooky it is. You know, I wouldn't say it's corny, I wouldn't say it's hokey, but it's very tongue-in-cheek. And it's going for this humor element, and but I'm not going to lie, I was kind of annoyed at some of this food that comes to life too, if I'm being honest. So, but I think it's the top of the good. I had a fun time with this. Now entering the very good, we have 3 episodes. At number 5, we have episode 84, The Cutty Black Sow. This was a story by Thomas F. Monteleone. I think that's how you say it. I give this a 4 out of 5 stars. This episode is very much like another episode that's going to be above this. It's a Halloween-themed one. I definitely think it's the second best Halloween-themed episode behind Trick or Treat and above Halloween Candy. But this one was very creepy. This great-grandmother is on her deathbed, essentially, and this young boy is talking with this great-grandmother, and she kind of reveals to him before she dies that this Cutty Black Sow is going to take her soul because she's going to die on Halloween night. And in order to prevent this, that they need to leave stones with letters marking the souls of the family members into the fireplace, light a fire, and keep them there on Halloween night until midnight, and that way that her soul can move on and rest, right? Well, what ends up happening is that the boy's stone may or may not get taken out of the fire, and the Cutty Black Sow might make its appearance. Let's just say that. It's a very creepy episode. It's based on like a Scottish folktale or something, kind of tying to the lore of Halloween. It's a very fun episode. It has this atmosphere to it. I can't really describe it to you, but it's just so creepy. The way it lays out its story. It's definitely one of the creepiest episodes in the whole show. I enjoyed it quite thoroughly. At number 4, we have episode 88, Hush. This was a story written by Zena Henderson, and I also gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. This is kind of like if you took Sid from Toy Story 1 and made a horror story based around his hobbies. Like taking toys and making like fucking bastard Frankenstein creations out of it. This is that episode. But it's almost like if you took that and you put like Halloween with Jamie Lee Curtis being a babysitter and splicing them together. It's so weird, but it's so creepy intense. I can't describe it to you. But essentially this babysitter is being hired by the single mom to watch her son while she goes out on a date one night. And the babysitter has babysitted him before, and he has a history of doing weird things with toys. And he's been working on things in his room, and he's created this Frankenstein vacuum monster with a hose that is supposed to try to drown out noise. But when it gets activated, something may happen to the controller, and this thing is essentially hunting anything that makes noise and trying to essentially kill it. It is fucking unique, and it's creepy. It's hard to explain. The monster design, it looks kind of funny in like a phallic way. But if you look past that, there's something about this that's just, it just, I think the directing here kind of helps it too. But it's just, how it's able to be tense, right? It's just so effective. And for a show this small budget, with a syndication budget, I tip my hat to it. It did what it was supposed to do. All right. And to round off the very good, at number 3 overall, at episode 74, The Moth. And that is written by Michael McDowell. And I gave this a 4.25 out of 5 stars. What pisses me off about this episode, it's kind of like my issues with Trick or Treat from season 1. If this had an ending that was actually good, I would have given this a 5 out of 5 and probably said this is the best episode of the whole show. But it has one of my least favorite endings of the whole show, unfortunately, and it takes it down to here. But everything else about this episode was fucking beautiful. Now, it's undisclosed in the time period it takes place in, but essentially this woman, she has a daughter that may or may not be a witch, and she comes home one night with a wound that is pretty much like a death sentence for her. She's going to end up dying. And the woman tells her mom that she's going to end up dying, and that that doesn't mean that she's necessarily going to die. It's just that as long as she makes it to daybreak, she'll be back to life. And the mom has found like this witchcraft book, and she knows that her daughter is doing some heinous things with men too. So she thinks that maybe the best thing to do is to make sure her daughter doesn't come back to life after she dies. And she has to weigh the love of her daughter in doing the right thing. And it's a very thought-provoking story. It was so riveting, I have to say. But the ending completely takes me out of it, if I'm being honest. But yeah, still one of the best episodes in the whole show. All right, now at number 2, we have the only great episode. And this one was the fan-made episode by Jason Quadrado. And this is kind of like Cuddy Black Sal, like I've already said, but it's episode 93, the final episode that I thought of to talk about here. And that is the Soot Man. The Soot Man fan-made episode. Written by Jason Quadrado, and I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. This, to me, is the better version of the Cuddy Black Sal. The story behind this episode was fantastic. You have this woman who has a boyfriend who's pretty much coaching her to do house heists. They've disguised themselves as a cleaning crew, and they have this big hit on this old-looking mansion that has an old woman inside that's injured, and she needs help cleaning. And it's rumored that she has a lot of money stashed in the house, and she's going to be able to get it. But when the woman goes to, talk with the woman her first day on the job, the woman tells her that it's important to be a neat freak in the house because dust invites the Soot Man, and the Soot Man lives in the fireplace. You need to stay away from all the fireplaces in the house. We don't have central heating, and that's the only way to heat the house. We have to keep it cold. And the house is frigid, and she's like, okay, this lady must be cuckoo. But she kind of files it in the back of her head, like, hey, we got to stay away from the fireplaces, and we got to be on top of the dust. But throughout the story, you kind of learn some tensions between her and her boyfriend, and that kind of plays into tensions with her and this woman, and she kind of just grows to tell her off, tries to threaten her, like, all right, tell me where the money is. I don't feel like doing this. Let's skip this rigmarole. She may do something to the woman. And then the Soot Man may play a role in the story, and there might be a fun little twist near the end. I do not want to spoil it for you. It has a comeuppance flair to it, but there's a really nice twist to it. This was entirely computer generated in animation. I think they used the Unreal Tournament game engine from the developers from Microsoft. I think that was the brand, or Ubisoft, whatever, that made those games for the Xbox and the Xbox 360. It does have those type of graphics. That's my only issue with the episode, is that while I do prefer this animation style over other shows that have animated specials like Creepshow and such, and I think I do prefer this animated special over Tales from the Crypts. I think that was the final episode. Here, it's the ADR doesn't match up with the movements of the mouth. It looks kind of cheap in some areas. The quality of the animation isn't all that consistent. But story-wise, atmosphere-wise, it looks and feels like a Tales from the Darkside episode. And I'm perfectly willing and totally transparent on this to say that this is my second favorite from Season 4 after adding it as a bonus. And I know that might sound blasphemous to a lot of Tales from the Darkside diehards to put a fan-made episode this high. on a season it's not technically a part of, but it's that great. It's that great. Yeah, no apologies. But my number one episode from season 4. This is the only perfect episode in this season and in the entire show for me. It is episode 86, Family Reunion. And this was a story by Edith Swenson. And I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. Family Reunion not only has some of my favorite practical effects, it has not only my favorite directing, I think it was directed by Tom Savini. It has not only my favorite jump scares, my favorite story, but it's just something that feels like a perfect package in this show. It's such an emotional story. It's about this boy who may or may not have been in a tragic accident that's given him lycanthropy, or given him like the illness that makes you become a werewolf. And his mom, unfortunately, was in this accident too. But we don't know what's happened to the mom. But she wants to find her son. And her son is being held captive by his father, who you get two different perspectives from parents who have split up. The dad is trying to find a cure for his son and trying to keep him away, not only so he doesn't harm others, but until he can find a way to help him. And the mom doesn't really want to help him. She just wants to have her son and know that he's okay, right? She has malice towards the dad. And as the episode goes on, you kind of learn why this dynamic is. And let's just say there's some great effects there. There's a body count. And it ends on a weird note, but it's so wholesome at the same time. It's just so memorable. This is my absolute favorite story. It hits everything I could want in a story. Now, I will say this up front. Part of my bias to this episode might be that there's a lot of love letters to Creepshow in this. Not only in the decoration of the boy's room, but just the setup to the story. This would be easily my candidate for the most like Creepshow story in season 4, and would probably be in my superlatives in my top 5 episodes from the show that feel like Creepshow. If I were to make like a Tales from the Darkside Creepshow movie type of thing, this would be in there. It would easily fit in with the modern day Creepshow television series. Let's just say that. But I do think that this is the best. The best of the best. And when I make my top 10 episode video, kind of a spoiler alert, kind of not, but this probably will be number 1. So yeah, that's my thoughts on season 4. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen season 4 of Tales from the Darkside. What's your favorite episode? What's your least favorite episode? Do you agree with my list? Do you not? What do you think are some underrated or overrated episodes from this season or the show in general? Whatever you feel like commenting. I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.